What's up, guys? PDC here, and today we are back with a bit of a guide. What I'm going to be talking about today is basically, I don't want to say this is part one because I haven't really decided on if I'm doing like one big long video or a bunch of short ones. I'm probably going to do a bunch of short ones, but this could be considered more of an introduction just to DPP in general, because a lot of people have asked me, like, oh yeah, make a guide on how to actually get into the metagame, because, my last video focused more on, or was more intended to an audience of people who more or less already have at least some experience in it. This video is going to be focusing on team preview and the metagame and how to play in it without having team preview. Team preview is something that has been around since 2010. When Black and White came out, and I'd imagine while some of you guys have obviously played DPP, most of you did not grow up with it. And like I said, I think there's a learning curve with DPP, and that learning curve that I experienced is different from the learning curve you guys experienced. So the whole team preview thing, even though I'm not, like, obviously people who started 2010 afterwards played older gens, like, that's obvious, but they mainly played like Black and White, Gen 6, Gen 7. So they didn't really have, they never experienced the metagame without team preview when it was, in its prime, which it's pretty interesting to me, but it's becoming more and more commonplace as people who played DPP when it was the main metagame are becoming fewer and fewer and fewer. If I actually look at almost all the top tournament players nowadays, well, some of these guys certainly played when DPP was the main metagame. And I mean played as in they were, playing Pokemon like in-game, casually. Very few of them actually played it when, played it competitively. Cut something out there real quick. Fucking program popped up. But anyway, today I'm going to be talking about how to basically adjust to a metagame which has no team preview, which you have to more or less meticulously find and make deductions, which may or may not be right, because you cannot be right 100% of the time with this. But really, it's just it's an acquired skill that, to be good at this generation or any generation prior to 5, you have to have. You have to be able to deduce Pokemon that are not revealed yet. So this is only gonna be the one slide I'm doing. I'm not doing the whole thing in a slideshow presentation. What I am going to be doing is moving on to replays later, but for now, the one thing I have to focus on is pattern recognition. Obviously, these are not all the patterns and combinations. These are just some common ones which I can use for the sake of example. Looking at this stuff, this is almost an entire team. These 5 Pokemon plus like Jirachi or any other 5th. Scizor can be the 5th. Flygon can be the 5th. You can even have Gyarados as a 5th, although that's more or less unsavory. You can have Inferno. This combination is incredibly prevalent, and when you see like a Breloom T-Tar, and neither of them are usually the lead, so you probably have a 3rd Pokemon revealed, you can deduce this type of standard build pretty easily, and you can deduce, you may not be able to act like, realize the exact version of it, because like I said in my previous video, this combination of Pokemon is incredibly vast, but the typical type, is centered on like the Breloom, T-Tar, Zapdos combination. Starmie is becoming a little less common, but it's still there. The Fire, Water, Grass core is what I'm really want you guys to pay attention to here. The Fire, the Water, and the Grass. These Pokemon are ridiculously common. This core is everywhere in DPP. It has about 1 million iterations, and it doesn't even have to be the main centerpiece of the team that it's based on, but it is usually just included because the Fire, Water, Grass core has so many Pokemon that are good included in its paradigm, and has so many Pokemon that work well together within it as well. It can be something like, Infernape, Starmie, Breloom, Infernape, Starmie, Shaman, Heatran with Explosion, Offensive Shaman, and then I don't know, Suicune, because Heatran plus Suicune is good, with Explosion. It can be anything like that, really. It really can. It can be incredibly wide, and the Fire, Water, Grass core, more often than not, you're going to see teams that have it than those without it, especially at the basic level where these types of teams are spammed, because I'm not going to go into it in this video, but they're very easy to use, and I suggest if you're new to DPP, you do use a team similar to this, because there's a very easy learning curve with it. Then you have things like, Metagross Dragonite, the Explosion plus the Mix Sweeper or the Breaker, and either of these can technically be in a lead position. Metagross leads have become a little less common. That's, up for debate because some people still think it's one of the best leads in the metagame. I think it's one of the best leads in the metagame just because of how amazing Metagross is as an offensive presence early on and how annoying it is for having a Jirachi lead or a Tyranitar lead. But teams like this, which typically focus on Metagross Dragonite, you'll see this core very often. It doesn't always include a Dragonite, but you're almost always, when you see a Metagross lead, it is going to be a team that's based upon breaking you down. And the Metagross is there because it has Explosion and can usually get a kill pretty much whenever it wants to, unless your opponent has a Skarmory or a Rotom. And most teams aren't going to have that. Or, technically, you can have this mon killed early game if you have something like a CB8 lead and you're willing to Flare Blitz, or a Spectran lead, which kills it regardless. Typically, these two mons are followed by Pokemon like Tyranitar, Rotom, Lucario. Just looking at these two, the Steel and Dragon combination is, one as old as time. And it's very successful in DPP because the Dragonite and the Metagross combo work so well off each other. And so does Metagross and Mixgon, or Metagross and CBgon, or even Metagross and Scarfgon, just because of basic synergy. And the ability of Metagross to, possibly lure out that Bronzong early. The point is, this is a very common offensive combo. And you're going to be seeing it pretty often. This was a really big core a few years ago with Lucario, Titar, and Rotom and Starmie stacked on top of it. Then you have the stall cores. The stall cores aren't, they can be varied. This is not the only one. I've seen iterations of things like Hail Stall, which Osgood has made, but Clefable Nidoqueen's really common because Clefable is going to be on pretty much every stall team, and Tyranitar's on pretty much every stall team, aside from a few deviations. So you're going to be seeing the Clefable, Nidoqueen, Titar combination pretty much everywhere. It can be Clefable, Nidoqueen, Titar, Skarmory, Rotom, Jirachi. It can be something like Nidoqueen, Clefable, Celebi, Skarmory, Swampert. There are a lot of variations of it, but you're going to see the typical standard Pokemon of Clefable, Nidoqueen for T-Spikes, or Skarmory for Spikes. You're not going to see Skarmbliss that much anymore. I actually don't see Skarmbliss all that often because Blissey as a Pokemon has kind of gotten worse because people are abusing spinners more. Starmie is not as good as spinning as it once was. And overall, usually Clefable is the special wall, even though, sometimes it can't handle boosted up mons and has trouble with things like Gengar. Without a Calm Mind boost or missing Focus Blast. Usually you'll see these types of teams pretty often. Scarftar is not as popular as it once was on stall, but it's still there. The most common stall team that I see nowadays, I see the Bada Bing BKC one pretty often, the one with these three, Skarmory, Jirachi, and Rotom. I see that team pretty often. Based on paralysis, more or less. Teams like this tend to be weak to Breloom just because stall and defense is incredibly inclined that way. So, yeah. Then you have the Flygon and Infernape Jirachi cores, which this isn't like an official, oh wow, this is the most popular core in the metagame. But it's common enough because U-Turn Lead Flygon is one of my favorite Pokemon to use. You'll notice a lot of the teams that I take big, credit for, or I've used in SPL, almost all share the Flygon lead, because I think Flygon is such a great lead, because it's an easy Pokemon to stick, it gets momentum, and if your backbone of the team can carry it, then that's actually a huge plus. One of my favorite teams actually has the Flygon, Breloom, and Infernape core. This one features Jirachi, and all three of these Pokemon, even if, Scarf Flygon is not, ridiculously deadly, have an offensive presence, and it's usually very good against balanced teams. Teams that lead with Tyranitar are going to be intimidated very early, and Flygon can sometimes scope out Pokemon, which Infernape can switch in on, or Jirachi can switch in on and get up rocks. It really doesn't matter. Teams like these are actually pretty decent against offense as well, because Scarfgon is a Pokemon that really does well versus offense. It's not easy to pursue it. It's faster than a lot of boosted sweepers. It is strong enough that it can take out a lot of frailer offensive Pokemon, and it has a decent enough move pool, which is the combination of Outrage and Earthquake and U-Turn, where it can threaten a lot of lighter offensive threats. Of course, being locked into Earthquake is terrible in DPP because you have things like Dragonite and Zapdos, which can easily punish you, or Breloom, but still, regardless, this core is very strong, and you're going to be seeing the characterization of U-Turn plus Pokemon that benefits from U-Turn on many teams. Just Flygon and Fernape Jirachi is just an example. Flygon Breloom is another example. Flygon Zapdos is another example. Flygon Heatran is another example. CB Ape plus Raikou is an example. The reason I say that is because there is a popular team which had, I think it was either Scarf or CB8 plus T-Spikes and then Raikou on it. You're going to see the whole momentum gaining thing in DPP pretty often, and I think that it's worth your time to recognize patterns like these, because, like I said, Diamond and Pearl is relatively centralized, if not completely. So it's worth your time, if you really want to get good at the metagame, to learn patterns, because if you don't know the patterns, if you don't know how to build a team in Diamond and Pearl and recognize the common things, then you yourself are never going to be able to be at that level, which you can do this stuff off the cuff. And now we're going to put this into practice with looking at some replays and both looking at leads and already half-revealed teams and seeing if we, from a viewer standpoint, can deduce our opponent's teams from some analysis and pattern recognition. And now onto the actual team example part. We're going to be going through a couple games, not that many, but we're just going to be looking at teams and seeing what we can learn from them. To start out, we're just going to go from the lead up. We're probably going to go through this game relatively fast. Oops. Let's just restart that here. We're going to see that Liberty 32 has a Gengar, but we don't know that yet. We're just going to go off the lead. So we're going to see that Liberty 32 and Stathicus have a Metagross and Flygon respectively. Now, keep in mind, Flygon usually does pretty well with things like Jirachi for rocks. It could have a T-Tar partner and Fernape as well. Basically, the core I wrote out last time with the Flygon, Jirachi, and Fernape, a Breaker core, Pokemon that sets up rocks, and a Pokemon that is able to offensively apply pressure, given the momentum Flygon provides. I'd imagine they're both playing offense, and Liberty 32, we're going to pretend we did not see the Gengar, and I would guess that his team is probably going to be based off of the early explosion, judging from the Metagross lead choice. It probably has Pokemon that benefit from having a physical wall killed. These Pokemon could be something like a Flygon of his own, a Dragonite. It could be the Mixgon team. It could be a Gyarados. It could be a Bronzong. Something that benefits from having an explosion and very fat walls on stall teams, at the very least slightly broken down. Pokemon like Swampert potentially killed. Now, we see that he has a Gengar, which is interesting. This team is going to be taking a very offensive turn. On a team like this, it actually would not surprise me at all to see a Gengar with Explosion. A dual Explosion team is actually kind of neat, and this could hint that he has more special attackers. We're going to see a Jirachi from Stathicus, and I'd imagine now he would probably have a T-Tar as well, and we see that's true. So we actually were able to guess a decent amount of the team. For Liberty 32, I would guess he has a fire and water resist, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say he probably has a dragon in the back. It could be Dragonite, or it could be an offensive water type like Starmie or Melodic. He probably has a Scarfer as well, which could be Scarfgon, because offensive teams typically do like to have Scarfgon because of its U-turn momentum gaining and general ability to revenge kill pretty much everything. And I would also guess he probably has a mixed sweeper, but I can't really be sure. I still think his team is subsisting off the explosion, so I would imagine he has a physical attacker, and T-Tar and Metagross go together rather well. If this Metagross does not have rocks on it, I would imagine almost 100% that he has a Tyranitar as well. So we're going to see a Dragonite from Stathicus, so there's the water and the fire resist for him. I would imagine that he would probably have another breaker. Looking at his team, it could be something like a Breloom, or it could be something like an Infernape. I'm not really sure. And Liberty's team could really have, I would still say he's going to have a Melodic or a Bronzong or something like here. He has a Melodic, surprise, surprise. I feel like you feel honestly I'm going off of analysis, but I actually do kind of remember some of these teams because I was actually on Stathicus' SPL team when he played this game. I'm remembering it now, but I don't know the whole team. So I'm gonna guess that it's still offense. He's gonna need another ground resist, so I'm gonna say he probably has a Flygon, a secondary steal, which could be something like Scizor. If he might have rocks on Heatran too with Explosion with Melodic, that's very probable too because Melodic plus Explosion Heatran is a good combination as well. So he's gonna go up to Clef and okay, we got the Infernape right, but the Clefable's actually pretty random. That's an interesting choice. I would guess that might be the rock for them. But looking at Liberty's team, he's revealed, only 3. Stathicus has revealed all 6. So it's really going to be on the pressure if Stathicus is playing to play the guessing game and really try to outdo himself here. I'd still imagine the team probably has a T-Tar on Liberty's side. Can't really guess the rest of it that accurately, but it's very possible it has another ground resist. I'd say T-Tar, Flygon, and then secondary Steel, which could either be Heatran, Scizor, or maybe even Bronzong. So we're going to skip ahead, and we see it as a Flygon, we see it's a Bronzong, and because you see the Bronzong, you know it's going to be a T-Tar for pursuing Rotoms. And that's the power of guessing. That's the power of guessing and analyzing teams. So even though it may seem like you're pulling this out of your ass because you can never really be sure, if you recognize which ones synergize well together and combinations such as Metagross, Bronzong, T-Tar, you can probably make sense of a lot of teams and play better as a result of that. Next game we're going to be looking at is another one by Liberty 32, SPL 8. We see Roserade. We're going to be focusing probably more on Liberty's team, as I think Roserade is going to be pretty easy for most newer players to guess what type of team it is. It's going to probably be carrying Toxic Spikes, so what benefits from Toxic Spikes? Things like Zapdos, things like Raikou, things like Jirachi, things like Heatran. I would be willing to guess that Liberty 32 probably has a Heatran on his team, and I'd be willing to guess he probably has U-Turners. Roserade builds can be pretty wide, so you can't really make a 100% accurate prediction, but, it's usually either, Heatran is a second. It could have a Swampert as well. I'd imagine he has multiple Pokemon that benefit from Toxic Spikes, or at least a main sweeper that does. It could even be Cresselia, and for that matter, it could have a Dugtrio as well. Roserade, just keep in mind that he's going to have a team probably centered around Hazards and Toxic Spikes. Remedy has a Zelf, which usually means it doesn't always mean, but a Zelf typically hangs around like Weatherless, Fire, Water, Grass offense. So we're going to judge off that. We see a Stealth Rock and a Leaf Storm, and we see a Jirachi. Looking at the Jirachi, this could either be Subcom Mind, or it could have rocks for its own right. We see that it's actually a Wish Jirachi, which we're not sure what it has. We see a Rotom, which makes perfect sense because a team like this is going to want to keep Hazards down. And now that we see it's a Wish Jirachi, and we see a Rotom, the team picture is becoming a bit more clear. We probably can guess that he has a very sturdy Fire Resist now in the back. I highly doubt it's going to be T-Tar, to be perfectly honest, because teams with Roserade that aren't based fully on Stall typically have Pokemon that like more weatherless things, like Zapdos or Raikou or Cresselia. And I would gauge he also has a Pokemon that which can handle or benefit from T-Spike. So maybe it's a Suicune. It could be something like a Starmie as well. He could even have a Dragonite for mixed sweeping. I'm not quite sure. But now that we see that Remedy has a Zelf Gengar, we can pretty much guess that this is going to be a very offensive-based team. I'd imagine he has something like a Scarftran. He could have something like a Shaman. I would put a pretty heavy bet on there being a Fire, Water, Grass core at play here. So let's skip ahead. We see it's a Calm Mind Jirachi, so we were able to guess that, yes, he indeed did have a Pokemon which benefited from Toxic Spikes and could set up with it. So we see Remedy's team, and we see the Empoleon, which makes me kind of think it could be an Explosion Gar for things like Blissey or Clefable. Although Clefable's not a very great Gengar counter, if one at all. It takes like 60, 70 from Focus Blast. The only thing it can do is paralyze it, pretty much. But we see the Empoleon. That's pretty interesting. It's going to not have rocks because Zelf has it. And I would guess that he probably still has a Fire, Water, and Grass, so Infernape and Shaman or Infernape and Breloom as the last ones is very probable. And then maybe a Scarfer, because it could be Scarfchan or something like that as well. Then we see a Metagross, which is interesting. Looking at his team, I would guess that last he might have a Mixed Sweeper in there. Remedy possibly has something like a Dragonite now. His teams like this, like I would think this is actually a blue offense team, which is literally color based and based on your Pokemon which are blue. So it's possible he has something like I remember Badoosh made one, but it's possible he has something like Coon as well. Or something that it helps or is helped by special breaking up teams. We see a Metagross switch in, and Liberty 32 is probably not going to stay in. He probably has a decent enough counter. He has Rotom, and he also has a Swampert, so we know that Swampert's going to be the rocker here. And looking at this, I would guess that his last Mon is probably not going to be a Zapdos. It could be a Raikou, though, because teams like this benefit very heavily and don't necessarily need a spinner. It could also have a Mixed Sweeper, something that helps threaten Stall and break it, because even though he has Calm Mind Wish Jirachi, that's not a 100% surefire way to beat Stall, it just helps a lot. So I'd imagine that he probably has additional breaking support, and I would still imagine that he has a Mon which would helpfully, or be helped by Toxic Spikes. So we probably see a second Calm Mind Sweeper, that's very probable. It could be a Dugtrio as well, that's possible, not incredibly likely, but I think it's still possible. We see an Empoleon, and there's the Heatran, which makes sense. Heatran does help with explosions and stuff like that. This could be the Scarfer, or it could not be. We see we see a Fire Blast, and then we see the Rain Dance Kingdra. So this is more categorized by color team, but looking at its special offense, we see the explosions probability, and we see Pokemon that bounce well off each other. Going through this, I would still guess his last benefits, and we see a Zapdos, which is interesting because there's no spinner, but Roscoe's probably going to lose this game as it is, and we see just an all-out special water spam team from Remedy. But we were able to at least derive that from Roserade, you know his team is going to be something that has multiple hazards and benefits very heavily from T-Spikes and pressuring of special walls like Blissey or Tyranitar or Powdon. So next game, we're going to be playing a different one, and we're just going to be in the middle of a game and seeing if we can guess. We're not going to go through the whole replay. We're just going to go off of this and see, and we can guess what Mons it has. So we see Zapdos, and we see Suicune, and then we see Infernape, and we see Roserade, and we see Celebi with Toxic Spikes. And looking at the Infernape damage, it looks like that Infernape is Scarf, and it looks like it's the very defensive Roserade, and we see a substitute Celebi, which is pretty interesting. Just looking at these teams, I'd imagine that Go 10, which is Volkire 10+1, and August. Looking at August's team, I would imagine he has something that can trap Tyranitar. I actually think his team probably has a Dugtrio, because running Zapdos and Calm Mind Suicune in the metagame populated by Clefable and very strong special attackers is not very wise, and I think a T-Tar could also damage his team. I'd guess he probably has something like a Dugtrio. Then he probably has a Rocker in Heatran or Jirachi. An Explosion user might be really nice for him, so maybe it's Dugtrio, Heatran, then he would probably, he might want a spinner for Zapdos, so it could be a Starmie. Probably something like that, I would imagine, is the rest his three others are, and his last one might be a Scarfer, which could be Flygon. It could be Rotom, probably, it could be Rotom because it could have a Dugtrio, or it could be something, you know, just like Flygon or even Infernape. Looking at Goten's team, he's probably going to have a ground immunity, and looking at his team is hazard-based, it's very possible he has a Rotom in the back. And also very possible he has a Skarmory in the back or something like that, because he definitely needs a steal. So he could have something like Rotom, Heatran, he could have something like a Bronzong, he could have something like a T-Tar. He can also have a Starmie on his own side. That's possible too. I'm looking at basically the three remaining defensive Pokemon. It could be, like I said, he definitely has a ground immune or like somewhere in there. So it could be something like Rotom, T-Tar, Starmie, something like that. So that's my guess. Let's see what it has. Oh, there's a Jirachi, and we see that it has U-turn, so it's possibly going to be a Scarf or Scarfrachi, or it could have Rocks and U-turn. We see a Heatran coming out from him. That's actually a pretty Flygon weak team. We see a Dugtrio from August, so we predicted that right. And then we see a Powdon. So this team has essentially no... I mean, a Powdon makes sense. Kind of, because I predicted the Sand. But usually it's very nice to have an immunity. I'm actually not a big fan of Goten's team. We see a last one of Starmie, so he has no ground immune at all, so this is probably not the best team overall, more counter team based, because I think you probably don't need the Celebi there. Celebi should probably be a Rotom or something. But it works, and we're going to see August has a last of Scizor, which is alright. It makes sense when he has a Dugtrio reveal, because that traps Heatran. And then we see a Tyranitar, which is interesting. It could be the Rocker on his team, or it could be the Scarfer. I would probably looking at it is the Rocker, so it's going to be a Scarf Jirachi, which makes even more sense because Scarf Jirachi lures in Heatran for Dugtrio. So looking at the special build, you see the common core of U-Turn once again, and you see things like T-Tar for rocks for shooting Rotoms. So overall, looking at our pattern recognition, this seems like it's a pretty standard team. Of course, you can't be sure all the time. Obviously, I can't make an 100% assumption, but I was able to guess that it's a very specially offense-based team, and then in the end, it was based upon elimination of Heatran, specifically to help SD Scizor sweep. Now we look at Tama and 6A9 Ace Matador, SPL8. We see that his lead is a Dragonite, which looks to be CB. We see that he has a Jirachi, which is Body Slam, which probably has rocks, and we see that he has a Suicune, which looks to be offensive. And then we see a Skarmory, which I don't believe set up rocks. We see a Flygon, which very possible it's Scarf, looking at the damage rolls and stuff like that. And we see a Heatran, which just Fire Blasted, which could very well be Scarf, looking at the damage. It looks to be a more offensive-based trend, even with the Flash Fire boost. Suicune's a tank. So let's see if we can guess these teams correctly. I'd imagine Rachi has rocks, and I would also imagine that Tama has a slightly better Scarf on Answer Resist. I would imagine he has a ground resist or immunity of his own, outside of Dragonite, which is lead. So my guess is he has a Ghost type, something like Gengar or Rotom, and possibly a Flygon of his own for a Scarfer. Maybe something like Gengar, Flygon. Could even have a T-Tar in the back or a Breloom. And then for AM, his team looks kind of defensive with the Skarmory. He's gonna probably want to water resist. It could be something like a Clefable, however. Clefable would definitely make sense. He could also have something like a Celebi or a Shaman. And looking at his team, needing a water resist, needing an Infernape counter, I would definitely guess that it's very possible he has a Starmie as well. Possibly Clefable, Starmie, or maybe not even Clefable, just Starmie, but definitely something that helps him versus Breloom and versus Infernape. So it could even be a Dragonite, but that's really all we can guess for right now. Like I said, this guy's going to need a Breloom counter, so let's see if we're right. We guessed the Starmie. Looking at Starmie, he's still going to need a Breloom counter, probably outside of Skarmory. So my guess is that he might have a Dragonite or a Zapdos. I think a Zapdos would make sense on this team. And we see a Gengar. All right, fair enough. And for his, we're going to see a Breloom from Tama, so it looks like we're guessing these things pretty correctly. And then we see a T-Tar from AM, which makes a lot of sense considering the Starmie, Skarmory. We could have guessed that pretty immediately, because when you see Skarm and when you see Starm, very probable that he's going to have a T-Tar to pursuit the Spinner and the Rotom. And it looks like we almost guessed Tama Home's team perfectly. We see a Breloom, we see a Flygon, which looks to be Scarf, and we see a T-Tar of his own. So it looks like we pretty efficiently guessed both of these teams more heavily Tama's. Like I said, I haven't viewed these replays in a very long time, so this is mostly, if not all, conjecture. So it's very possible we could be wrong, but it's better to give you guys an authentic look at how to do this. And now we have Fakes and Phil. Now, looking at these teams, looking at Fakes, I can immediately see that his team is going to benefit from T-Tar being killed. So I'm going to go around and say he has a Dugtrio as well. And looking at Phil's team, this possibly might be the same team Roscoe used. I actually just clicked these replays at random. So we're going to go based off the same thing, and I'm probably going to say that his team is a water resist and a bulky water, or it has a mixed sweeper like Dragonite. I would guess one of those two, or it has a Starmie. Fakes, he's gonna have a Starmie of his own, almost certainly. He might have a Doug Trio, and he might have, possibly, probably has another Scarfer. Could have a Scarferachi. I would guess Doug Trio he almost certainly has, and I would guess Starmie because he has Zapdos. And it looks like his team's pretty defensive. But really all I can guess for sure is Starmie. I would think he might have a Doug Trio, and it's very possible as a T-Tar as well. So we see a Kingdra from Phil, so it's not the same team, but he does have the Water and Fire resistant Batmon. And looking at this, I would guess he might have a Pokemon which benefits. If this is, it depends if this is DD or Specs. I mean, see, it's DD. So looking at this, I'd imagine if he has Scarfcon, he might still have the Gengar because he definitely needs an Infernape counter. He probably has a Fighting Resist, so it could be either a D-Knight or a Gengar or even a Gyarados, but I'd probably lean more towards the fast Gengar. We're going to see a Jirachi from Fakes, which leads me even more to believe that he probably has a Doug Trio. We see a Jirachi from Phil, and we see a Starmie from Fakes, which makes sense. And I would still imagine Phil has a Gengar or some Fighting Resist. And then we see a T-Tar, which, you know, makes perfect sense as well. While Fakes' team isn't as heavily hazard-based, T-Tar still makes sense, but we were able to derive that he definitely had a Starmie, and a T-Tar makes perfect sense as well with the Clefable balance and base team. For his last, we do see a Dragonite. Easily to note that he definitely did have a Fighting Resist, or at least something to help him versus things like Breloom and Infernape. And for Fake's team, we were able at least to derive that, yeah, it's very probable this guy had a Starmie because he had Zapdos. I was willing to go out on a limb and say he might have had a Doug Trio as well, because I know Fakes himself is a big fan of Doug Trio, and on a team with Clefable and Zapdos, it does make sense that he might have a Doug. Even if our predictions are not 100% correct, they were still pretty good, and they didn't come out of our ass either. We were basing our analysis on pretty tangible things. We were able to analyze and look at, you know, common paradigms and combinations in team building and transpose them and, you know, into real life battling situations. And that's what you have to do in DPP. I went over a couple examples here, and I would be willing to even do some more games in a future video. But going through these takes a little time, and I think the best remedy for actually getting better at this is doing it yourself. I'm just teaching you a technique, the very basics of it, and seeing if people can hopefully derive, you know, the same expertise and the same ideas into their own games, because this is something that, to be a top DPP player, you have to have. You have to be able to predict stuff like this. You have to 100% be able to predict last month situations. You have to be able to predict things. You have to be able to predict types, resists. And while in Gen 5 and up, you don't need to, you just have to predict the sets, and the sets become pretty predictable when you know the whole team. DPP, you don't have that, so it's up to you to guess what mon they have, and use logic and your own knowledge in the metagame to do so. It's an acquired taste, and it's not easy, and it's even harder in things like ADV, or at least it is for me, in a metagame which I'm not as familiar with. So DPP is hard, and there's another layer of skill to it as well with the team guessing, which some people refer to as randomized and really unlikely, because you can never be 100% sure. But it's an acquired skill, and that's why I myself did this without really any prior knowledge of the teams these people were running, or at least not with a good memory. I had a very, very rough idea about what these guys are running, because I have witnessed these games before live in SPL, but this is all my prediction, and I really was honestly trying to guess the teams here. And you guys should try and do that too. When you play on the ladder on DPP, when you face people, when you watch replays, when you watch games live, try and actively participate. Guess. Guess what their opponents is running. Guess what the player you're watching is running. Guess what the guy in the ladder is using. Hell, when you build teams in DPP, you only get better at this because you realize what types of mons are used to plug in certain holes. And once you get good at building in DPP, this skill goes up a lot, so I would advise you do that a lot as well. But anyway, guys, that's it for the guide. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'll probably be doing more DPP-focused things as well in the future. Leave that in the comments, what you think I should do. And of course, follow me on Twitter and subscribe. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.